The Transfiguration, what Jesus revealed on the mountain, according to the Bible. There's a moment in the life of Jesus that stands apart, suspended between heaven and earth. Time and eternity, silence and divine proclamation. It didn't happen in a temple or in front of a crowd. It didn't come with public fanfare or political weight. It happened on a mountain, quiet, mysterious, glorious, and only 3 disciples were there to witness it. Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain. What they saw there was unlike anything they could have imagined. Their rabbi, the man they walked with, laughed with, and followed through dusty roads and crowded towns, was suddenly transformed. His face shone like the sun. His clothes radiated light like lightning, and in that moment, it was as if the curtain between heaven and earth had been pulled back just for a breath, to show them who he really was. This wasn't just a display of divine power. It was a revelation of identity, a confirmation of everything Jesus had been trying to show them through his teaching, his miracles, his love. The Transfiguration was more than an event. It was a moment of unveiling, not only of who Jesus is, but of who we are in him. It was heaven shouting into earth, "This is my son, listen to him." But why did it happen then? Why in that way? And why only those 3 disciples? As we journey together through the Transfiguration, we'll go far beyond the surface. We'll dive into the weight of glory that filled that mountaintop, the significance of Moses and Elijah appearing beside Christ, the trembling awe of the disciples, and the voice of the Father breaking through the cloud. And we'll see how this moment was never meant to be contained on the mountain. It was meant to descend with them into everyday life, into suffering, into obedience, into transformation. This story isn't just for Bible scholars or Sunday school classes. It's for anyone longing to see Jesus more clearly. It's for the one who's been walking with him, but still wondering if they've fully grasped who he is. It's for the heart that needs to be reminded that before the cross, there was glory. And after the cross, that glory still remains. So come closer. Lean in. Let's ascend the mountain together. Not for spectacle, but for encounter. Let's see what Jesus revealed, and let it change us. They had seen him tired. They had seen him hungry, dusty, and asleep in the back of a boat. They had seen him cry. They had watched him bleed and sweat and kneel to wash their feet. But on the mountain, they saw something entirely different. They saw his glory. Matthew 17:2 says, "He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light." This wasn't a trick of the atmosphere or a symbolic vision. Jesus was changed right in front of them. The Greek word used here is metamorpho, the same root for our word metamorphosis. It wasn't a glow, it was transformation, a revealing of what was already true, but had been hidden beneath his humanity for a moment. The veil was lifted, the divine broke through the human. Glory, which had been cloaked in humility, now radiated in its fullness. This was not borrowed brilliance, this was his own glory. The glory he had with the Father before the world began, John 17:5, and he let them see it. Imagine what it felt like for Peter, James, and John to witness such holiness, to stand in the presence of unfiltered majesty. They had walked with Jesus for years, but now they saw him not only as their teacher but as the eternal Son of God. This moment matters because it affirms a crucial truth. Jesus wasn't merely a prophet or a revolutionary. He wasn't just a wise man with a radical message. He was and is God in the flesh, fully human, yes, but fully divine. The Transfiguration doesn't change who he is. It reveals who he has always been. And even now, that same glory hasn't faded. Though we may not see it with our eyes today, the Spirit reveals it to our hearts. Paul wrote into Corinthians 3:18, "We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another." The glory that once radiated on that mountain is still transforming lives. This is the Jesus we follow, not just a good man, but the glorious one, the one whose face shines like the sun. And when we truly see him, everything changes. As the disciples tried to take in the brilliance of Christ, something even more astonishing happened. There appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Matthew 17:3. This wasn't a vision or symbolic gesture. Moses and Elijah too Giants of the Old Testament stood right there beside Jesus. But why them? Moses represented the law. He was the one through whom God gave Israel the commandments, the structure, the covenant. Elijah represented the prophets, the bold voice of correction, direction, and promise together. They embodied the entirety of God's covenantal communication with his people, the law, and the prophets. And now they stood not as equals to Jesus, but as witnesses to him. They didn't shine like he did. They didn't speak with divine authority. They were there to testify, to honor, and to show that everything they had pointed to, every command, every prophecy found its fulfillment in Jesus. Jesus himself would later say in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And here it is, displayed in brilliant clarity, the law and the prophets converging on the mountaintop to bow before their fulfillment. Imagine the weight of this moment for Peter, James, and John. Their entire spiritual heritage stood embodied. Before them, every scroll they had studied as children, every prophecy they had clung to, every story passed down. And here they were, Moses and Elijah, speaking with Jesus, affirming him, pointing to him. Luke tells us that they spoke with Jesus about his departure, his exodus, the same word used for Moses leading God's people out of Egypt. But this time, Jesus was about to lead a far greater exodus, not from a physical place, but from sin, death, and separation from God. This part of the Transfiguration is a declaration. Jesus is not one voice among many. He is the voice. He is not a step in the story. He is the culmination of it. Moses and Elijah fade from the scene. Only Jesus remains. That's the message we need to hold on to. Religion, tradition, and history all point us toward Jesus, but none can replace him. In the end, we must fix our eyes on the one who fulfills it all, the one who stands radiant on the mountain, with the law and the prophets behind him and the cross before him. Just when it seemed the moment couldn't get any holier, a cloud enveloped them. Not just any cloud, but the cloud of God's presence. The same kind that filled the tabernacle in the wilderness, the same cloud that led Israel by day. And from within that cloud came a voice, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Matthew 17:5, the voice of the Father, clear, undeniable, majestic, not a whisper, not a vague inner impression, a declaration from heaven that shattered silence and shook the souls of the disciples. The Father doesn't speak often in the Gospels, but when he does, he says something world-shifting. These are nearly the same words he spoke over Jesus at his baptism, but here, he adds a directive: listen to him, not just admire him, not just follow him when it's easy. Listen to him. God is placing all of his authority, his affirmation, his approval on Jesus. He is making it crystal clear to the disciples. This is not just a rabbi, not just a miracle worker. This is my Son. In that moment, the disciples fall face down, terrified. And who wouldn't be? They had heard the voice of the Creator. But here's what happens next, and it's stunning. Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." Matthew 17:7, the same one who radiates glory, who is affirmed by the Father, who stands above the law and the prophets, kneels down, touches their shoulders, and speaks words of comfort. That's who Jesus is. Not only divine, but deeply personal. He bridges the holy and the human. This voice from the cloud wasn't just for Peter, James, and John. It's for us too. In a world filled with voices, media, culture, fear, doubt, the Father is still saying, listen to him. Tune your heart to his words. Let them guide you, convict you, comfort you, transform you. Because when God says to listen, it's not merely a suggestion, it's the invitation of a lifetime. Peter, James, and John had seen Jesus perform miracles. They had heard his teaching with authority, watched demons flee at his word, and even witnessed people raised from the dead. But none of it prepared them for this. The Transfiguration was different. This was not a miracle performed for others, it was a revelation of Jesus himself. And the only proper response was awe. Scripture tells us in Matthew 17:6, when the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. The presence of God, the radiant glory of Christ, and the voice from heaven overwhelmed them. They didn't argue. They didn't clap or cheer. they collapsed. Because when humans come face to face with divine holiness, the only response is humility. But fear wasn't the end of their story. Jesus, in his mercy, approached them, touched them, and said, "Don't be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one but Jesus. Moses and Elijah were gone. The dazzling light had faded, the cloud had lifted, and only Jesus remained. There's something deeply significant in that. After all the glory, the voice, the brilliance, they were left with Jesus alone. It's as if heaven was showing them, "This is all you need." Everything else fades, but he remains. Peter, famously impulsive, had tried to freeze the moment. "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters." Matthew 17:4. He wanted to build tents. He wanted to preserve the glory. But God didn't allow that, because the mountaintop wasn't meant to be a permanent home. It was meant to shape their journey back down. That's what divine encounters do. They aren't meant to be hoarded or memorialized. They're meant to transform us. Peter, James, and John would never forget this moment. It would become the lens through which they understood Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. It would prepare them for persecution, for hardship, and for the call to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. And it would change how they saw Jesus, not just as a great leader, but as the glorified Son of God. Later, Peter would write about this moment into Peter 1:16-18, saying, "We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." He never got over it, because once you've seen the glory of Christ, you can't go back to living the same. The same is true for us. Real encounters with Jesus produce transformation. They shake us, humble us, lift us. They don't always happen on literal mountains, but they happen in prayer, in worship, in scripture, in the quiet moments when His Spirit whispers to our hearts. And they always call us to live differently. The mountaintop was glorious, but it wasn't the destination. Jesus didn't take the disciples up there to escape the world. He took them up to prepare them for it. Because at the base of that mountain waited the crowds, the conflict, the pain, and ultimately the cross. After the Transfiguration, Jesus tells them not to speak of what they had seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Matthew 17:9. Why? Because the glory they had witnessed couldn't be fully understood until after the suffering. The Transfiguration was a glimpse of resurrection glory, but the path to that glory ran straight through Golgotha. It's no coincidence that the moment of divine unveiling happens just before Jesus begins to speak more openly about his death. He's preparing them not just to believe in who he is, but to follow him through what's coming. This is crucial. The same Jesus who shines on the mountain will soon bleed on the cross. The glory and the suffering are not opposites, they are inseparable. The Transfiguration wasn't a detour from his mission. It was a preview of what's on the other side of obedience. And this is where we must wrestle with our own expectations of God. We love the mountaintop moments when His presence is tangible, when answers are clear, when faith feels easy. But we don't live there. The real test of faith is in the valley. It's when the glory fades and life gets hard. It's when we remember what we saw on the mountain and carry it into the shadows. For Jesus, the glory was never about personal display. It was always about revealing the Father and redeeming the world. That's why He came down. That's why He went to the cross. That's why He rose again. And that's why He still invites us not just to ascend with Him, but to walk with Him. Even when the road leads to sacrifice, the Transfiguration teaches us that glory is real, but so is suffering. And when we walk with Jesus, we carry both. We carry His presence, His promise, and His power even when the light dims. The mountain was just a moment, but it revealed eternity. In that brief encounter, heaven touched earth, the Son was revealed, the Father spoke, the law and the prophets bowed, and the disciples were undone, not because Jesus became something different, but because they finally saw Him as He truly was. And that changes everything. We live in a world that often sees Jesus as small, just a moral teacher, a historical figure, a comforting myth. But the Jesus of the Transfiguration is none of those things. He is glorious, radiant, eternal, the fulfillment of every promise, the center of every prophecy, the beloved Son of the Father, and the one we are called to listen to. But the mountain isn't the end of the story. Jesus came down And he walked the road to Jerusalem, to the cross, to the tomb and then out of it again. He showed us that true glory isn't found in escape, it's found in obedience. And resurrection always follows surrender. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice. To chase emotional highs or to walk in daily faith. To settle for a glimpse of Jesus or to be transformed by him. To treat the mountain as a memory or as a mission. Jesus still reveals himself today. Maybe not in blinding light or thunderous clouds, but in the quiet of his word, in the whisper of the Spirit, in the power of his love. And every time he reveals himself, he invites us to be changed, to listen, to follow, to carry what we've seen into a world that desperately needs the light. You don't have to climb a physical mountain to encounter Christ. You just need a heart willing to see, a heart that says, "Show me your glory, Lord, and make me more like you." Because the Transfiguration wasn't just for Peter, James, and John. It's for you too. And when you see him, really see him, you'll never be the same.